This is part 2 of my video series on my Invisible Ink AI ghostwriter. The part 1 was showing you just where to find this on my website, effectiveedu.com, and a little bit about the background of what I was trying to create. This part, you're going to actually get to see it in action. So this one's a bit longer because we're using prompt 1, which is the fully interactive one, which asks you a whole lot of questions about what you want to accomplish with your ghostwriting. The third part of this series is going to be the custom prompt, and I'll show you how to customize that and then you'll be able to use that instead of prompt 1. So enjoy. And you can literally copy that, go to ChatGPT, and then paste it right in there. It's pretty long. There's a lot. If you look at that little scroll bar at the bottom right, there's a lot. So I'm not going to scroll through it. You can, again, examine the prompt if you want, but I'm going to just hit return. When you do that, it puts the prompt in and then jumps you back to the top. You have to hit that down arrow to get to the bottom of it. Okay, and so it's writing out all this stuff that I told it to say. This is actually, again, not coded, but this is something that I told it specifically to do when I engineered this prompt. And what I've done is I've written out just some canned responses that I can use here rather than typing them in. So I'm going to copy the next response it's going to ask for. But the first thing it says is, what do you want to do? Do you want to ask me any questions or should we get going? We're going to say we're going to get going. And the second question is basically, who are you? What do you do? And so you would write out exactly who you are and what you do. I'm going to just paste in the thing that I wrote. It's going to praise you a little bit, which is nice. And then it's going to say, what are we going to write? Okay, again, this is an argument, if you're going to use this more than once, an argument for using prompt 2 and customizing it. You don't need to see this every single time you go through and do this. Plus, if you're using ChatGPT 4, this is actually costing you credits that you're allowed in a certain amount of time. So if you do this too many times, you will run out faster and you'll have to wait those 2 hours or whatever it is before you get to use it again. So the slimmer you make this, the better. All right, what did we write for you today? I'm going to paste in again the thing that I've written, repurpose a long article I've written into smaller social media posts, and return. And then the next thing it's going to do, just copying the next one, is to ask for your audience. Who are you writing for? Again, these are things that you can put into this custom one if you grab prompt 2. Okay, it won't always do this, but this is saying which of these responses do you prefer. For our purposes here, I'm not sure that matters so much, but we'll give ChatGPT some feedback when it's done. Yeah, so one big difference here, the one on the left is closer to the actual instructions that I gave it. So I wrote that it should say these rules to you. So in the left side, make the writing sound as much like your style as possible. That's something that I wrote. Mimic your client's style as closely as possible. That's something that it came up with. I actually wanted to say precisely what I told it to, so I'm going to reinforce that by selecting it on the left. Okay, now it's asking, do you have any further guidelines? So what it's doing here is, in this step, it's saying, I have some rules that I have to follow. These are, again, in that prompt that I engineered. So some of the rules are, it's not allowed to make up examples. You don't want ChatGPT just inventing stories about people because they're not your stories. It can only use the answers and the content that it's provided. It's not going to go and just make up dialogue in order to prove a point or something like that. I've noticed when the AI tends to write, it tends to try to invent these sort of unique metaphors or interesting cliches. It's a little weird, and so I specified that it shouldn't do those things. I do want it to write in a unique and interesting way, but I don't want it to sound formulaic, sort of. And I do want the writing to sound as much like a human as possible and as much like my style as possible. So those are the guidelines that I've written into that prompt. There are other guidelines that might be useful for you. So for instance, if you don't want the AI or let me rephrase that. If you want the AI to use as much of your actual writing, the words that you use, as possible, you may want to tell it that. If you don't tell it that, it's going to try to go and create something that sounds kind of like you. And what I've found is that it's not as accurate as if it actually uses the kind of words that you would use. Now, it doesn't know yet what kind of words I would use because I haven't plugged those in yet. But I'm in the next step after this, I'm going to actually give it a large amount of writing samples that will tell it what my writing sounds like. But one of those guidelines that I want is for it to actually use as much of my original writing as possible. So I'm going to say keep as much original writing as possible. And I'm going to just copy and paste that right in here and hit return. And if it works right, it should ask me again, are there any other guidelines? Okay, excellent. So it's saying it's just added that guideline, and are there any others? Now, another one that I like to add is that I want to start my writing with a hook, and I want to finish it with a conclusion, with something that's an interesting conclusion. So I'll write those in. Okay, and I have it reiterating these things so that you actually know that it understands, or at least has restated what you want. And then the style that you want to use, one of the next steps, the style and tone, it's actually going to evaluate your writing. So I'm not going to put anything in about that, but you can if you want to describe your own tone. So the next thing it's saying, do you have any more guidelines? Is there anything else you want to adjust? And I'll just say no. So in this step, you can paste in one or more writing samples. If you're going to paste in more than one, you need to separate them so that the AI knows that they're separate samples. And so I have some samples put together. I've got 6 samples that I've just grabbed off of LinkedIn, things that I've written, and I'm going to just paste them in. So this is the extent of the 6 samples, but if I scroll back, there's a lot here. That was sample 3, sample 1. So this is going to give it a lot of information to go on. You could actually put more than that. Like it said, you can do up to about 3,000 words, and you can do more than that if you do multiple inputs. So now it's, again, saying, do you want to add any more samples? No, we're going to proceed. So I'll say proceed. So now it's going to do an analysis of my writing style and tone. If you haven't seen my own writing, this is actually pulled directly from those samples. So these are things that I said at the beginning of a couple of my different pieces that I put out. Rhetorical devices, I do use rhetorical devices. It's moving pretty quickly. Incorporation of evidence, I definitely do that. Now that's going to be, the personal experiences will be difficult for it to mimic, but hopefully it can actually use some real world evidence. I do try to write these clear and concise conclusions to wrap things up. And I tried, it's very flattering for it to tell me what I think I do well. So that's nice of it. It's then going to say all the ways that it's going to try to mimic my style. And these will be based on the things that it just analyzed. You can adjust this if you want to, but it's going to basically do an analysis of what you write, how you write. Then it's going to say, this is what I'll take from that in order to mimic your style. And then finally, it's going to say, are there any issues between my guidelines and your style? And I have seen, when I did this in Gemini, it was interesting. It actually pulled out the fact that I use examples and that it's not supposed to use examples, and asked me, what should I do? So ChatGPT consistently has not been seeing that conflict. Gemini did. So just read the response and respond with whatever you needed to do to move forward. So it's asking, if you want to adjust anything, you can refer to it as list blank, point blank, subpoint blank. So if I wanted to say, actually, I want to change this point, I would say list to point 1, subpoint 1, change this to whatever. But I don't need to do that. I'm going to go ahead with what it said. So I told it when we started that I wanted it to take an article that I'd written and I need to rewrite that article. Whether or not I had done that, this is the next step. It's going to say, is there any other writing that you need to accomplish your goal? So if you had an article that you wanted to respond to, if you had an email you were trying to write in response to something, you would need the original text. And so that's the next step here is what is the thing that, is there a thing that I'm going to use, any other writing that I need to accomplish my goal? So I have an article that I posted recently. It's the one that started with Gen AI is a TI 30 and the humanities are having their slide rule moment. And if you haven't read that, I liked it. I think you should read it. But I'm going to just paste that in here because, actually, whoops, I almost screwed up. So it's asking me to start with a yes or no, not paste the entire thing in. So I'll just say yes. And then it's going to say, okay, what is it that you're going to share? And now it actually wants the text. This is important. You can't just point it to a URL because I don't actually know that every AI you're going to use is going to be web enabled. There are some that are, but don't assume that it is. So just paste in the text. So that's the text of that piece. That was this piece here. A little self-promotion. I think it is a good one. And I love that image that was a ChatGPT creation. Okay, so now it's saying, I wrote this intentionally to loop all of these questions. Is there anything else, any other pieces of text that you want to share? So if you were responding to 3 different posts instead of just one, or pulling together ideas from 3 things, then you would want to put in more. But for right now, no. I'll just say proceed. And the next thing it will do is say, here's what I could write. So it'll give you up to 5 different summaries of the potential responses with some details. And it's actually starting to write out some of the things that it could say, which I don't love. And I've sort of struggled with it to try not to actually write the post yet. But the idea is there that it's saying this is the kind of post that I could create. So let's see what we've got. AI is humanity's next great educator. So what this article is about is comparing the current moment that we have in time. Gen AI is coming into use in the humanities in education, and I'm comparing it to the use of the calculator in the 1970s when math education had to wrestle with the idea of moving away from the slide rule and towards the calculator-enabled math classes. And then I connect those things by saying the calculators allowed deeper math learning and enhanced educational objectives, and I think that AI can do the same thing if we use it well. So with that in mind, let's think about what potential LinkedIn post we might want to write. So this first one is about humanity's next great educator. I don't know if I want to call AI as the next great educator. It's a tool, not an educator. Double-edged sword. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so it looks like 6 is the closest to that article. So that's the one that I'm going to choose, I think, because what I really want is for it to not create a whole new thing. And it actually made a mistake here that it pulled from one of the sample writings that I had and then used that as a topic. The perception of reality has nothing to do with the article that I'm having it rewrite. So I don't want that one, but just be careful with that. The instructions are very clear in the prompt that I only wanted to use the samples for understanding the writing style and tone, but it seems to slip up sometimes. So just grain of salt this, make sure that you actually know what it's going to say. So I wanted to go with 6. So I'll say, please write 6. Perfect. Okay, so it actually followed the instructions. What it's supposed to do is put a line there to say, it's actually supposed to say, I'm ready to write your masterpiece, but didn't do that. So it's got a little bit of a mind of its own still, but it did write that line that I asked it to make it clear that this is the thing it's writing. And so now some of this is... Yeah, a lot of this is not my own writing. And I did say keep as much of my own writing as possible, but I didn't say only use my own writing. I do see some similarities to my own writing, but it definitely is making stuff up. But if we read this, the debate is not new, but the context is unprecedented. That definitely sounds like something that I could have written. The question remains, how do we integrate Gen AI into education in a way that enhances rather than diminishes our humanity? Definitely something that I could have written. I do write about that a lot. So it definitely has taken the content that I use, the 6 different articles that I put in, and it's saying, I understand enough about the way you write to say these are the kind of things that you would say. And yep, and again, I think that's as we navigate this slide rule moment for the humanities, let's aim for a future where technology and human insight coexist in harmony. Not sure about that one. Maybe just without harmony, enhancing our ability to learn, create, and think deeply. Yeah, I don't love that conclusion, but there's some stuff in there that might be usable. And so that's the experience I've had. So it'll come up with stuff that's where some of it's decent, some of it's not, and you might want to pull some of it out and use it, and you might want to reuse others or rewrite others. So the next thing it does is it says, does this meet your needs? Do you want to adjust anything? And it tells you all the different things you could adjust. I put in it omitted that. So again, it's got its a mind of its own. It's supposed to tell you here that it will not. Oh, it rephrased it. It says, if you ask me to rewrite, I'll need to regenerate the text, but can keep whole parts of what I wrote if you copy and paste those into your response. It's supposed to say, as an AI, I can't, blah, blah, blah. So it rephrased, but that is correct. It's not, you can't say, I want you to rewrite this, but just change the conclusion. It's not possible because the AI will recreate the whole thing. But what you could say is keep this as the first paragraph, literally copy and paste this in and say, make that your first paragraph and rewrite the rest. Or you could even say, take all of this stuff and rewrite the last paragraph, but literally copy all of this, copy and paste it in and say, I want you to keep this. You can also just modify it. You can say, adjust my audience, adjust my guidelines, whatever it is that you want to do. You can do combinations of these. So if you want to adjust the guidelines and the purpose and the writing samples, you can do that by saying the different numbers here. What I wanted to do is actually change this because this is a bit longer than I was hoping for. It's not terrible. It's a little bit long. I wanted to make it about half as long. So I'm going to say rewrite this shorter. And so that's number 4. I want you to do number 4. Please write about half as long. I'll say please rewrite. And then I also want to adjust the guidelines to ensure you use as much of my own language as possible from the supplementary writing I provided. So I don't want it to use the writing samples writing. I want it to use the supplementary writing. I really just want a revision of that piece. So I'm going to specify that. But you could say just use any phrases from my own writing in my writing samples, and then it would pull out things that would sound even more like you. So let's see what this does. All right. Don't love the hook, but certainly shorter. And it did create at least 2 of the 3 hashtags that it's supposed to. It says it's supposed to create 3 in there, I think. Transition, revolutionize math education. So I'm going to say, let's pretend, we're just for sake of time, let's pretend that this is good, but we want a stronger hook. Please write a stronger for what you just wrote. So you can be very specific with what you're asking. Oh, and it didn't really listen. It actually looks pretty similar to what it just wrote. Actually, that looks almost identical to what it just wrote. we'll just say yes, and then move on to the next step. Okay, so the next step on this, once you've finished the writing, is it'll create an image if you want it. Now, this is fully dependent on you actually being in an AI that will create an image. You can't do this in ChatGPT 3.5. You can't do this in some of the other AIs that are for free. So if you tell it to proceed and it can't, then it just will fail. It won't be able to create anything. But I'm in ChatGPT 4 here, so I'm saying yes. And it's going to say, do you want me to just try to align with your style, or do you want to tell me what you want this to look like? So if I say surprise me, it's going to try to figure out a representational image for what it just wrote. And again, it's not behaving quite the way that I programmed it. It's supposed to tell you what it's going to do and allow you to modify it with your own instructions before it creates the image, but that's fine. Oh, that's interesting. Little creepy. I think let's maybe make that more abstract. There's just something that's weirding me out about this bridge to nowhere with people writing on a calculator. So let's create something more abstract that represents the article. Bright colors, illustration style. And I could go a bit more specific with that with more time here. Interesting. So I don't see a slide rule in there. I see two calculators, and it's been kind of funny. I've tried to get it to create a slide rule, and I don't know if it knows what it is. It's had some trouble doing that. I'm going to try one more time. Can you redo and include? I do like the color scheme that it's coming up with now. And there's the abstract image I'm not thrilled with, but it's not terrible, but it's only showing calculators, sort of. I'm not sure what the thing on the bottom is. Looks like some kind of weird shaped calculator. So I'm hopeful that it'll actually build in a slide rule this time. Oh, that's interesting. So it made almost like a mechanical calculator there. Still no slide rule, but that's sort of an interesting illustration. Let's pretend that that one's good. I would, if it were doing this for real, I would refine this more. But yeah, I think that's going to be the one we stop on. Say great. And then there's one final thing it does if you say there's nothing else to do, which is to write you a little parting gift. I've seen better haikus. So that is the ghostwriter. And as I said, this is the fully interactive version. It becomes a lot faster if you use prompt 2 because you've customized so much about it. It doesn't need to ask you all those questions. So it'll definitely speed things up. But hopefully you found this interesting. I'd love to hear what you thought and whether you use this, whether you think this is something that is going to be helpful to you. So let me know what you think.